Welcome everyone to the Traffic Corner. It's Tuesday, October 11th. And thanks for joining us. The Traffic Corner is brought to you by Spack Enterprise. Hopefully most of you know all the different things we have going on. And today, typically, it's myself, Mike Spack, and Brian Fisek give these presentations, but Bryant is out speaking at the PTV conference talking about Bistro this week, so I've asked Max Moreland and Jonah Finkelstein from the office to join me.
Hello, this is Jonah, and this is Max.
So last week we covered pedestrian crossings, and this week we will cover a couple of case studies related to parking. So to start, when we look at a parking lot or a parking situation, we have about 8 criteria we like to go through just to make sure we don't miss anything. First, which seems very self-evident, is going through the vehicle circulation, either in the parking lot or on the street, and where those crossing paths are. This gets really complicated at a gas station when you think of all the different ways we like to sketch out the different paths the vehicles could flow in and try to minimize those to the best of our ability. Also look at truck circulation. Are the trucks going to be crossing a heavy pedestrian crossing? That's an important deal to try to minimize bicycle paths and racks if bicycle infrastructure is included. An important one is to cross-reference either the city ordinance for how big a parking stall and the aisles need to be, or if the city doesn't have their own ordinance, to go back to either the Urban Land Institute or Institute of Transportation Engineers. Both have guidance. The number of required stalls is often you go back to city ordinance, but also then both those Urban Land Institute and ITE have guidance as well to cross-reference how much parking we think they need versus just what's required in the ordinance. Then we get into a few other things that are kind of secondary, looking at the walking paths, again trying to minimize people as they walk to the front door, and where those ped crossings are. Shopping carts could be important, and also the signing and striping within the parking lot. And lastly, with all of these issues, trying to minimize and have clear paths for each mode, so minimize the conflict areas. So our first example is a lifestyle shopping center, one of the first in Minnesota, out in Woodbury. It's one of the first in the Twin Cities. Just a bunch of small uses, restaurants, and other. You can see some of the names of the different shopping outlets. Big parking areas behind the buildings, but they tried to create a little main street down the middle and create kind of a outdoor walking mall was the concept when these lifestyle centers were first introduced to Minnesota. And as we zoom in, we can see they built this little main street with on-street parallel parking, and when Google did their aerial shot here, we can see it is parked out. If we go back to the bigger view, we can also see the landscape architects got a little fancy here with the pedestrian crossings. I've never seen a pedestrian crossing oval before. But the issue now, the lifestyle center is successful, and this parallel parking is premium for these businesses, and they're looking at a way can they make improvements. The developer engineers came up with this concept of switching over to angled parking, and the city basically came to us and said, hey, what's your opinion on this? Good, bad, ugly, things we should be concerned about. And as we zoom in, they basically took some of the sidewalk width here, and they also got rid of the ovals to try to cram in around the existing trees, and also some infrastructure. They had to leave some parallel parking, but they put in angled parking as much as possible. So with that, Max and Jonah kind of going through the checklist, things that jump out at you, thoughts?
So the first thing that jumped out at me is that this area is kind of was going for that Main Street feel. and when you add the angle parking, that obviously cuts away some of the sidewalks, so pedestrians are, narrowed down in the area that they have. It still meets ADA requirements for the sidewalk there, but there's less of, it's a more narrow sidewalk, so there's less of a Main Street feel. Along with that, that's kind of the negative to the Main Street. Positive is those ped crossings were tightened up where those big ovals used to be. So now it's nice, tight ped crossings, so that's good for going from one side to the other.
Yeah, that'll help lower the conflict, which is one of those concerns we talked about earlier, kind of minimizing the time that pedestrians could conflict with vehicles. Another positive with this is, as Mike was saying earlier, these spots are kind of a premium, and by turning them at this angle, we should be able to get more spots in there. So by checking the dimensions of those spots and verifying that they do meet the city requirements and all those requirements, we're still able to get more spots in there, which the shops will like as well.
Yeah, so our starting point was to check the dimensions against city ordinances. Do they meet the minimum width and depth requirements? Do they meet the minimum aisle widths? Do they still provide wide enough sidewalks for ADA requirements? And the engineers did design all this. They don't need any variances. They meet all the minimum requirements. So yeah, check the important here, stall and aisles, sidewalks, and better ped crossings were kind of the three things that jumped out at us. Lastly, one concept we've thought of since we're going with angled parking is they were showing front angled-in parking, and there's a concept called back-in angled parking that we thought about. Kind of knew there's a few instances of this in Minnesota, but definitely not commonplace.
Yeah, so the angled parking got us into an unusually long discussion about how people park here in the office and talking about going from the parallel to the angle and which one is better for traffic movement through and safer for drivers. Parallel, obviously, you're stopping and you're backing up, and not everyone's very good at it, so sometimes it takes one or two shots to get in there. And with pull-in angle parking, it's really easy to pull in. But backing out, it might be tough if you're backing back onto where through traffic is, and you might have a blind spot there if someone's parked next to you. That's why we kind of thought this back-in parking would work. So back-in parking would work because kind of like parallel parking, you go beyond and pull back in, so you do block the traffic, but when you're pulling out of the spot, you do have pretty good visibility. It's easy to get out. So.
And another benefit of this back-and-only angle parking is when the vehicle is parked, there's more access to the trunk. Get in the car, access the trunk, and get everything in there, which is nice in the shopping center, where you're not going to have people standing in the driving way, putting anything that they bought, anything they purchased in that area in the trunk. It keeps them away from the vehicles, gives that little bit of a buffer, so it should be a little bit more safe there as well.
Right. So the back end basically pull past like a parallel parking, and then back in. The back end maneuver is easier than with the parallel parking. And then when people come out, they have a clear view of just the opposing traffic, and they should be able to pull out smoother than a parallel parking. Right. Definitely, Jonah touched on this a little bit. People in a heavy shopping area, the trunk access is right at the sidewalk, so people aren't milling about out in the drive aisle, so that makes for smoother operations in the drive aisle as well. And yeah, just the theory is here, it works a little bit smoother. So that was kind of our one. We went through the checklists of, yes, it meets all dimensions. It changes over the feel a little bit if the city's concerned about that. And then we did bring up the back-end only angle parking, and the city was a little hesitant on that since they don't have it anywhere else in the city, but so I don't think they're requiring that one. But maybe on the next project, if we keep bringing it up, maybe one of these times, we'll get it to happen. That would be fun and I think good for the system.
Yeah.
So let's go on to our next case study and move away. I can turn off the pointer. Okay, our next case study was about 2 years ago. This is De La Salle High School, my alma mater actually, in downtown Minneapolis. It is on Nicollet Island, which is kind of fun. It's an island in the Mississippi River. It's been there since 1900, and you're on an island, so not a lot of places you can go to expand parking. They have a parking lot in front of the school building here. The school is doing well. When I went there, we had about 400 students, and now they're bumping up to their maximum capacity of 800 students. And with 800 students, you can imagine a couple hundred seniors and a couple hundred juniors, all with a good proportion of driver's licenses. Right now, this is the front door ways coming in. There's a side door over here to access the school building complex. Out in front, there's 149 parking stalls. Off to the side is a small lot with 16. So by any metrics of a high school, they are well underparked. They don't have the supply to match the demand. So they brought us in. Can we do anything to improve parking here short of putting a parking deck on top of this, which they're contemplating, but that's a several million-dollar project and would change the feel, kind of landscape of this area quite a bit. So thoughts going back to our checklist. Max, you helped me out quite a bit with this one.
Yeah. Real quick before getting into the thoughts, I remember we did a site review of this location back 2 years ago and went on site during the middle of a school day. And the number of cars double parked in this lot is more than I've ever seen anywhere in my life. They're just jammed in as much as they could be, and there are all sorts of parking tickets on there from the school. So it might be a little revenue for the school.
Yeah, they have since actually cleaned that up quite a bit. They started actually towing kids, and that they made the philosophical decision that they need to be hardcore and only let in the students that had parking permits.
Yep. So with that one thing, the first thing we looked at is the aisle width, parking, the size of each parking space, and how much can we tighten those up to just change the striping and get some more spaces in there. We measured that with 8-foot spaces. We could squeeze in a handful more spaces in the lot.
Yep, some of the aisles had 8.5-foot stalls. Some of the aisles had 9-foot, kind of mixed and matched in here. So yeah, that was first recommendation, is just tighten up these spaces. And the people with the big pickup trucks, kind of a bummer for them, but it is an urban school. They gained a handful of spots by just restriping out there. And along with that, we did look at angled parking, trying to figure out, is there any way we can reconfigure the lot? The property line kind of follows these trees. It angles a little bit, but it is really tight of how much property the school owns. But we looked in CAD trying to spin these spaces around, rotate the whole parking lot 90 degrees, make them angled parking, anything we could think of. We could not find a layout that greatly improved things. So minor improvement there. So yeah, we recommend going down to 8-foot stalls, which they did. Another big issue with the school a couple of years ago is this two-way aisle in front is about 32 feet wide, and at the time it was two ways, and in the morning and the afternoons school buses park here and drop kids off, and also park to wait to pick kids up, and they flow around the island to get out to the bigger roadway network. But also parents were dropping kids off along this aisle, and also had the kids running back and forth across this aisle. One big thing I like to look at when, in the perfect world, building a suburban school out in a cornfield, the mantra is separate uses and modes as much as possible. So have bus pickup, drop-off queuing off on one corner of the building, have parent pickups and drop-offs off on another corner of the building, and have their student, teacher, visitor parking off on another corner of the building. That's the ideal if the architects can make the internal flow of the school work, to have the external transportation network off on different sides of the building. So along with that thinking, we ended up recommending in the morning and afternoon, they changed this to a one-way traffic flow, put some cones out here to tighten this up to just be a single drive aisle, and put staff out there to enforce this one-way flow. They did that, and that was a very successful experiment. The next step, they asked the city, this is a little strange, this is actually private aisle, but somehow the city had jurisdiction and needed to give them approval of trying to make this more permanent, and we were going to put out big planters, kind of a halfway temporary, I've talked about several times in the past, to make it more permanent, but not quite going all the way to curb and gutter, and the city denied that idea. So they're still every morning and afternoon going out there and putting cones down to enforce this one-way flow. And also we figured out that we could do student pickup and drop off over on the side door here for the school. Not all parents, especially in the morning, parents are still dropping kids off. They kind of dance in and out of the buses, but in the afternoon, when the buses are all queued up here, the parents did get the message, and the school is really pushing the pickup over here.
So it's a big safety improvement, going from two-way flow with parents dropping kids off and buses parking all in the same drive aisle, one-way with just buses in the aisle, moving all the parents away, and just that one-way traffic makes it a lot safer since all the kids are parking in the lot, crossing that aisle on foot.
And then one thing that I thought was pretty cool about this use, and as pretty much everyone knows about the school use from us being there or dropping kids off, is there's really two big peak periods, and during those times there's a lot of queuing, a lot of stacking of vehicles waiting in and out. But outside of those two main periods, there's usually a lot less traffic visiting the site, and because of that, another recommendation that was made was the addition of flexible midday parallel visitor parking along that path. When there aren't as many cars trying to utilize that, when there aren't as many cars queuing for pickup, we were able to actually use that area for parallel parking spots. So that visitor parking was right up front when you get the parents picking up kids for appointments or anything like that. So it's really getting that flexible use where when you need space for queuing, we're able to use it for queuing and the pickup and drop off, and when we need it for parking, or just kind of some open space to get a few more people in, because space was the main concern here, we're able to do that as well with this.
Yep. So those were our three big recommendations, as Max alluded to. We also worked on with them emphasizing, hey, you have to stop all of this double parking out there. We even talked about getting some gate arm systems here, but the school didn't want to invest the money there, but they have tightened up their kind of patrolling and towing. One thing, fans and readers of mine know that I like experiments, and so we started out a couple years ago at the end of the school year when we introduced this one-way flow and the pickup drop-off over here. A minor concern was, would cars stack out here? This is Hennepin Avenue, an arterial coming into downtown Minneapolis, and it's a one-way fully divided, so people actually have to turn right in, right out over on the south side here, loop around the island to come in if they're going eastbound. But coming westbound, it's a right in here. We're concerned about what the vehicle queuing was going to be around the school site. We didn't want to back people up onto Hennepin Avenue. We thought that would be a safety concern. We were concerned about congestion with these kind of an intersection here, and then the driveway, full driveway here in the middle. Also concerned about queuing back as it goes into a small neighborhood. So we set out half a dozen cameras and recorded this for a week. Scrolled through the videos just to make sure that things were operating okay. I went out there one afternoon just to witness it myself. But watching all the videos, everything with this experiment flowed smoothly. In fact, it seemed to flow a little bit smoother because of the one-way flow at these two driveways. But with any kind of experiment like this, we like to run it as an experiment and look at before and after data to make sure we're not really screwing things up with our experiment. So I definitely encourage you, if you have any if you're going to be running any kinds of experiments, to do that way. So with that, that's our presentation today, talking about parking. Chris did talk about muting, and I, in the middle here, was able to turn off everyone's microphones. But if anybody had any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take those right now. If you want to put anything in the chat, we're a little ahead of schedule on these 2 case studies. Okay, radio silence, not seeing any comments or questions out there. So when looking at parking, just to wrap up, we did have the bullet point list of 10 different criteria we like to look at, and we're certainly fans of checklists around here. Do you have a layout of the final design? No, we do not. We actually didn't do a layout for them. They just came in and seal coated the lot, and they told their striping folks, this was paint right here. They said just make these aisles all 8 foot. This was the area where they had 9 foot, and so they were able to squeeze a couple of spaces on the end. Was the punchline there. So again, a school project, not a lot of money. We were just giving them bullet points of things they could do. If spinning things around in CAD would have resulted in a big change to angled parking or something like that, or moving curb lines around, we definitely would have prepared plans for them, but we didn't go to that extent with this project. Okay, with that, thanks everyone. Oh, did you consider adding ped crossings from car park to school? There are right here, there's curb cut ped crossing right there, supposed to be the main aisle, and there's a secondary one that doesn't show up on the map. Here, there's a front door and there's a front door, and there is ped crossings in there right now. So we did not look at adding that, but that's a good point that those should be there when looking at a parking lot. Cool, thanks Ian. Thanks everyone for joining us. As usual, please email me, mspack@spackconsulting.com, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, things we could improve on. And with that, we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.